Welcome back to another set review. This time we're doing MSJ, MSEM Jumpstart.
Yep.
Wait,
And despite being a reprint set, there's still some new cards in there.
yeah, so we have, I believe, 42 new community design cards, as well as we have 9 cards from bonus sheets, so sets that were submitted to MSEM but didn't manage to make it in the format. We'll just treat them one amorphous blob. And I will say that the new cards in the set are really darn powerful in general. I think basically all of them have some degree of constructed playability. But for the interest of like time and our own sanity, we'll not be going through all of them, just the ones that we found particularly interesting.
Yep.
And maybe just to fire off some quick ones that maybe are like especially good in some decks, but maybe aren't the most like interesting or like creatively inspiring cards, I guess. We'll start off with some tribal cards. So Dance the Great Current.
That's Merfolk Tribal.
Yep, Wizards and Rogues too. If you can trigger this, it's the bounce mode. This is great. You should put in your deck. If you can't, don't put in your deck. Leno Exemplar, excellent at Elves. Warriors too. It has that double trouble thing. Does do a particularly nice thing with Elves, similar to what Merfolk used to be able to do exclusively, where you have the OTH Lord that fetches another creature of a lower mana value.
Scavenger.
Yeah. In Elves, that's Modric's Harrier, so you can get double Lords off your 3-drop. Synchronous Battle Armor, if you're playing robots, very powerful card, shuts down any hopes of your opponent's blocking entirely. It's 3 mana, but probably worthwhile. And then Fairda's Anointed, I think that's even seen some play already in some of the cleric decks that have been running around, but gains 2 life instead of 1, works as your Sorceress Sister, and also anthems you if you have a good enough life.
Yeah. So I mean, they're just all tribal cards that you play if your deck can support it.
Yep, pretty straightforward, pretty nice. Nice upgrades to a lot of these decks too. Might give you another reason to try and build, say, blue robots. So maybe on to some cards that are maybe a bit more like
Interesting? Or
need more like new shells, I suppose. Amelie, this first card with Oros is basically, I think Oros is basically a tribal card.
so tribal mono red, I guess.
Tribal red pips, yeah.
Yeah.
So Oros is really good. I think just in terms of like individual power, from at least from what I've seen, kind of running around with League with a big mono red deck, is that Oros is probably the most powerful card in the set. Just kind of in like as an individual card, because he does a lot of damage. It's not weird for Oros to be dealing like 6 to 8, 9 damage on the ETB, since you have such good triple red 3-drops with Rapacious Battler and MSO of Antiquities.
Conveniently enough, they're all from the same set. So yeah.
But
I mean, Altabac was a monocolored set, so no surprise there, I guess.
oh yeah, Rapacious Battler. I would say. I believe Hass's March is also like.
Yeah, Nahasa's March is also from Altabac. Like,
Yeah.
so many good red cards are from Altabac.
But Oros makes use of all those cards. Is a nice 4-drop, which is pretty nice. Because Big Red didn't really have a good 4-drop.
Well, I mean, they used to just not run 4-drop because they topped out an Inhisur's March, right?
Yeah.
And then your other really good 3-drops, a triple pip 3-drops.
But Oros is really scary. Has a nice synergy elsewhere. With like King Ken, for example, because the King Ken token exiles at end of turn. So if you King Ken a Rattler and then play Oros on the following turn, then you get extra 3 pips. Or you can just King Ken the Oros if you're nasty.
And King Ken makes it non-legendary, right? So you can just Oros and shoot your opponent again, and then after attacking, you sack it to draw 3 cards.
And like Oros is good enough that when I was playing Big Red, that I don't even use the sack mode ever. The sack mode is obviously pretty good, but the ETV is really what you're playing this for. Also, the can't be counted part is nice. Means that you can run into a sinkhole with no concerns.
How come Oros has the can't be countered ability? Like, why is it there?
Counter the king.
Yeah.
But I think what kind of thematically Boros does, as far as Big Red is concerned, is it gives you a kind of tribal card in a non-tribal deck. Where what tribal decks are really good at is that if your opponent just leaves them be for a couple turns, they will just kill you. They'll play enough lords and have a big enough board state that you'll just die 20 times over.
Yeah.
And that's something that Big Red kind of lacked, where, yeah, Rattler's a great card, but if your opponent just kind of plays a couple of good blockers, it's not going to kill your opponent that fast if they leave it in play. But now with Oros, well, yeah, Rattler will kill you through Oros. And it gives a good strong linear plan for the deck.
Yeah. So moving on, is this another mono red card?
Yeah, so we have Ragavan, and Amelie Ragavan is at least partly a tribal card. So maybe not entirely different than, say, like Dance of the Great Current, but does have a bit more of a niche because it is just a good one drop.
It's basically Cannon Ragavan, except you don't get to steal your opponent's cards when it hits,
Yeah,
and it doesn't
it
dash.
also, and I believe the treasure is tapped.
Yeah.
Instead of untouched.
So somehow, even with all those nerfs, it's still really good.
Yeah. So the I think the main niche that Ragavan has is that it's, I think, the best red one drop in as far as like non-aggressive decks go.
So basically, just the same thing as Cannon Magic now.
Yeah, kind of. Where the only real option we had for like big red decks prior to this was Lieutenant Daisy Saxon, which is a very good card, but if you only have one red drop, one drop, you can't really base a strategy around starting the game on turn one. Whereas if you have two, then it starts to become a bit more reasonable to expect to have that pressure going on.
Yeah.
And Ragavan helps you do that. Obviously, can snowball a bit. Turn one Ragavan, turn two kill your opponent's blocker, turn three Rattler, kill your opponent's blockers again, and then you have plenty of mana to Oros and Kinkan and whatever. Do whatever the hell you want to do. Flashback the Flames approach.
Right. Right. Big Red actually has a lot of good ways to use all their access mana because they have so many cards that flash back from graveyard.
Yeah. And of course, Ragavan is a Pirate's Trouble card. It triggers on Pirates hitting, not it hitting, though it, of course, is a Pirate. And Pirates, of course, appreciate Ragavan a lot. Very much so the best one drop for Pirates. Previously, they didn't really have any great creature one drops. Seal of the Sea was the only one. So instead, they played Heist Most Daring and Sinkhole, both of which are good cards, but having another creature is nice. And also, Pirates makes good use of mana with Lysine, for example, being very mana intensive. There's certainly a lot of good pirate creatures, like costing 3 or needing more pirate center, stuff like that. Brimstone Ration is also pretty expensive if you just have, well, it can be expensive if you want to put the mana into it.
Yeah.
Another thing that you can put mana into is Unrivaled Fireweaver.
Right, so now we have a card that rewards big decks. And guess what? There's a bunch of really good red cards, so since it's so hard to make decisions about which ones to cut, why not just run all of them?
So Fireweaver's a very interesting card. I think if Oros is like the most like individually powerful card, I think Fireweaver's, or in the set, Fireweaver is probably the most versatile card in the set, just because you find so many things. Though merely it's red instant sorceries, which are not necessarily known for being the most versatile set of cards, but there's enough versatility there that you can make good use of this.
So the most obvious choice for this card is Sear Flesh, because then you just become a 3-mana Ravenous Chupacabra. Other good options include, well, actually, what other good options are there for wish targets?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot. A lot of it's burn. I mean, the Flames approach is a good target, gives you much value. But lots of stuff like Brutal Blow, Artifact Hate, Unstoppable Slaughter, which we'll talk about more in the VHS review, is a nice Wrath. You can play Sheldrain's Rage if you want a different kind of Wrath. Whole bunch of other cards, like Chew the Scenery if you want to go all in randomly. Unburden Rage is a really decent tech option. I believe it was Just Nobody that mentioned a 3-card combo that works just with Fireweaver, where I think it's Conquer Psyche, Instant of Brilliance, and Fleeting Resonance, which is an 11-mana kill, but only takes 1 card. I'm not going to but there's a lot. She-Host Command is another good target, and then you get more if you on multicolored decks. So maybe instead of playing the Flames approach, you play Solar Flare. But lots of options.
Also, it gives me an excuse to run greenside decks again. Like this card actually has really good card types for 8-sack because it's a human wizard, so that means you can breed into both of the deck's most important card types. And then it's
it also does
4-drop for 2 mana, so you can lurk it and get up to 5-drop on a really early turn.
I think the only awkward thing about this card is that a lot of the cards mentioned aren't really good sideboard cards necessarily. Like there's a bit of weirdness in sideboarding like the Flames approach, though it's a good card to find off this. And well, yeah, Seer Flesh is a good sideboard card. Well, you can't side it in exactly.
I mean, you're just dedicating part of your sideboard to a wish board, right?
Yeah, so you're making a wish board, but the wish board does very quickly become very big with Fireweaver. So how much of it's going to be, how much of the sideboard is going to be dedicated to this card, I don't know. And additionally, the awkward thing is that it makes you go up to 80 cards.
I mean,
so
your index, they're a thing, right? They worked out pretty well.
Yeah. But the kind of weirdness about it is that, well, because you're 80 cards, you're less likely to find Fireweaver. So it's kind of like a 3 of and a 60 card deck. But typically you run like 4 of your wish card if you're running a dedicated wish board. Then again, if you're playing 80 cards, your sideboard's less important already. So maybe it evens out.
Unless you're playing a deck that has a bunch of tutors, in which case then silver bullets become a really precious sideboard slot resource again.
Yeah. Well, so if you're running a whole bunch of tutors, then you can find Fireweave more often. But if you're running a whole bunch of tutors, then your sideboard's more important because you could tutor the sideboard cards.
Well, no, creature tutors or tutors for green creatures because of a deck that in Red Green Ramp I've tried running this card and that deck uses a lot of Green Sun Zenith effects. So
yeah, this card's just very interesting. Very good power level. Also, it's not actually that hard to get up to 80 cards because if you're like starting from a normal deck, because you have 60 cards, then you had 4 Fireweaver and then 8 lands. There's only really like 8 more cards. Unlike Yorion, say, which is in the sideboard, so you need like 12 more cards.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because that's less slots for you to play with, right?
I don't know. There's just a whole bunch of things about this card, but just a very good value card. Also just and not to talk about Big Red that too much, but this is also pretty good 2-drop, which is something that Big Red's been lacking, and also gives you value, which is always pretty nice when you want to, because all the Big Red cards don't necessarily give you that much value. So yeah.
Yeah, enough about this card. So let's move on to a non-red card.
So Elvish Wayfinder finds you lands.
It's like Satyr Wayfinder because it triggers both on ETB, but also triggers on attacks.
Yeah, so I think kind of the basic understanding of this card is that if you play this card, you will never miss a land drop, like ever.
You can still whiff. Like you have to deck build around it, right?
I mean, okay, yes, you technically need deck build around it, but at the same time, we've kind of, I think at this point, people are like, yeah, playing with only different land names is pretty easy. Just with how many like Heart of Zudina decks there are. Like maybe you have like one overlapping card type or land type, or land name rather. But fetches just make it very easy to do this. So I think the real value of this card past kind of just never missing your land drops, which is of course good, but maybe not worth a slot in your deck, is that this looks at a lot of cards. So if you want to set up a Hotazina kind of strategy, well, you don't need to play multiple. This looks really deep to find your Hotazina or your Monument Queens or your Nareba or whatever your land of choice is. Miagate is very nice in some matchups as well. And in looking at a lot of cards, it also reveals them. So this reveals your Seek Prophecies. So if you're playing...
Have been nerfed?
It has been nerfed, but I mean, still, it curves out of it. Turn 2 Wayfinder, turn 3 Seek Prophecy. It's a curve. And of course, you're hitting all your land drops, so the mana nerf isn't maybe as impactful as it would be to other decks. Yeah, I think that's probably enough to like warrant some kind of deck building around this, where this kind of fills up a curve a bit, makes your deck pretty consistent. I think a lot of the options for like tutoring lands start coming at 3 mana with what's the artifact that bolts for like 10 minus lands?
Oh, Gate of Realms.
Yeah, Gate of Realms. That comes at 3 mana, so a lot more awkward against more aggressive or more temporary strike type strategies. And I don't know. I think this card's interesting enough to maybe be worth a consideration in a new kind of deck. Another kind of good enabler, I think also designed by the same person, is Syncretic Master, which plays in a similar space with Domain instead of Wanderlust.
I mean, it's basically the same
Where,
thing. So
yeah, similar, but instead of finding unique lands, you want unique land types. And Syncretic Master does a couple unique things where it looks at all cards, obviously, but it also bins them.
ooh, bins
So
them. I
nice.
didn't know this.
Yeah, so nice graveyard synergy there. And also and finding a lot of cards is pretty nice because another one of the more powerful domain type cards is Burning Up, which is 2 mana, deal 5 if you have domain 5. So this helps find Burning Up. It also helps find stuff to flash back Burning Up if it's already binned. Say Breach Lilies. I mean, Timo Roombrawler was a deck that found domain.
Remember back when Team Rune Brawler was a thing before they nerfed the lands, or what was it?
Yeah, back when shifting lands were much better triggering landfall. And then on top of that, you also have just a good body, good value. If you want to find yourself with bullets, this looks at a lot of cards. Looking at 5 cards is a lot. Of course you do.
The bigger question is, how reliably can you get to look at 5 cards when you play on curve?
So I think the big question with that is, are you willing to fetch a trial land on turn 1? Because I think if you are pretty reliable, you can do it pretty reliably. If you're not, it's probably looking at like 3 or 4 when you drop in a curve.
That's still fine, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was always a pretty big fan of oh god, the cannon card 200 blue 1/3 sleight of hand.
Renegade Supplier, or what's that guy called? Right?
It's from Rise of Eldrazi.
Oh, okay. Oh, Seagate Oracle.
Yeah, Seagate Oracle. I always like Seagate Oracle. Seagate Oracle. It's felt very nice to play, and that only looked at 2 cards. So if you're looking at more than 2 cards, that becomes even better. And honestly, this isn't even unreasonable if you just play it in a 3-card deck. It's just good value. 3/2 is a pretty good set line too.
Yeah.
So moving on, we have a couple of white cards. Starting off, we have Squadron Ambassador, which the first part of it makes 2 tokens. So 3 mana, make 3 1/1s.
Yeah, that's
which
pretty
is
good.
pretty solid. Artifacts, if that matters for what you're doing. The second part is very interesting, where basically it kills anything that ETBs that's not a land, not a token, if it's not the first thing to enter. Well, you can only play 1 non-land, 1 non-token without dying. That also does include you. This is symmetric.
Yeah, so first of all, it makes 8 sack really sad, in case 8 sack still exists.
Yeah, 8 sack would be pretty devastated. You do still get the ETBs, which is something.
Wait,
but yeah.
It's a trigger. Never mind. 8 sack doesn't care about this because their things already die on the ETB.
Okay. So let's go into rule stuff here. Active player, non-active player. Right. So your 5 Truth Seeker gets lurked out.
Okay.
And it's active player, right?
Yeah.
So your ETBs then get put on the stack.
Okay.
And it's going to target what lurks, and then non-active players, the Squadron Ambassador is going to put on the stack, and then your 5 Weaver is your Truth Seeker is gonna get poofed.
I see. So I just have to combo during the opponent's turn.
Exactly. Yes. If you fire Truth Seeker on your opponent's turn, you're good. Well, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, this does hit 8 sack. Which I mean, if you hate playing against 8 sack, that's maybe reason to play it. Probably does hit a whole bunch of other random stuff too. Of course, anything that's like 8 sack like. So say you play against Jam Mao, which sacks a creature, finds a new creature. This does prevent that from doing so immediately. Some combo decks also don't like playing against this, though maybe this is not too generally applicable. It's kind of hard to say.
Aggro decks don't like playing against it because now they can't drop creatures as freely.
Yeah, that's pretty fair, because this does also make like 3 jump blockers, which is pretty good. I did put this in mono white sideboard. I started it once, probably incorrectly, but I mean, a lot of the power is just on the ETB, where you get 2 1/1 tokens in itself. So I was using it with Chronicles of the Kitsune, so the 2 1/1s became 2/2 flyers, and something that's very good. But it does hit itself, so well, you can play it, but then you can't, if you have like 4 mana, you can't go with it plus Chronicles of Kitsune, so you have to kind of manage it a bit.
Right.
Make sure that your deck makes sense for it if you're playing it just main deck for the tokens. Probably hits a whole bunch of random stuff that we're not thinking of.
Well, like anything that's like old EHS that pulls stuff from deck.
Oh yeah, if you're EHSing at creatures, it would hit that.
That's
Couple
like
of like
Kalilia Scavenger, Matrix Harrier. I mean, those guys.
Oh yeah, those are pretty good. It's 2. Make stuff like Toddy -4 pretty annoying. Anything that puts a non-land permanent in play without paying mana, that restricts your opponent a fair bit. But yeah, probably have some more applications, but I think just playing it for the baseline ETB probably isn't too unreasonable. And hoping that hits your opponent occasionally too. Another white card, we have Fox of the Mushroom Forest, which card I designed.
Is this for Fox Tribal?
Yeah, so I guess I can speak quickly on design because I designed it. Basically, the idea is that you play this on turn 2. You're protected from a nasty thing your opponent does. So in a tribal deck, this would be Rast, but more generally, it's stuff like Offie or Dawson or Toddy. Pretty nasty cards that you don't really want to see just in general. If you're playing any deck. And then the idea is that then you play a Lord on turn 3, which will buff up the Fox, the Mushroom Fox. Fox and Mushroom Force is a long name. And you attack in, you probably don't want to block it because it's buffed up by your Lord, you get the hidden, and then it'll still continue to protect you from grass and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the theory around the card. Was also interestingly the only card in the new cards in the set that got a balance adjustment, which I find a bit funny.
Wait, really?
Yeah, 3/2. Yeah. So clearly there's at least some strength to the card. So if you're playing Foxes, I think this is really darn good. Obviously you don't want to be playing it some Ras without easy way to deal with it. Obviously it's a Fox, and there's not too many Fox in the format.
Yeah, I mean Fox is kind of a meme deck right now, right?
Yeah, it's pretty stock aggro where there's not too much going for it, but you can play it if you want. If your opponent's not prepared for aggro in general, you might get them. But more generally outside of Foxes, because this doesn't actually have any specific Fox energy besides being a Fox and maybe working well in aggro decks. It does set up for turn 3 pretty well. So the deck I was playing in had was Polyp Goals based and had Helena for turn 3. So this allowed you to kind of maybe brute force Helena through like counter spells or what have you. Make sure that Helena can land on a safe board. It also more generally, if you have stuff that maybe removes a creature on ETB, then you can make sure you get the hidden to make the sack mode cost less. So maybe that's another way you can play a bit with it. But even if you don't want to play 4 of this, it's just kind of a decent Toddy target. And of course, Toddy is a pretty well played card.
Yeah.
Also gives some stack, and this also just gives some stack interaction in white decks, which is hard to come by. So yeah, enough monologuing about that, unless if you have more to say on it.
Did you come up with the name?
Yeah, so I found the art first, and then name based on the art.
Okay.
And not be like, yes, of course there's there's art of foxes in Wasps of Mushroom. And that came afterwards. Next card we have is Riddicule's Vanguard, which is the bonus sheet card from Primavera. Coming with a very interesting keyword reprocess, which needs you to pay different mana from different sources. So you cannot reprocess with, say, 4 planes, which would kind of be the baseline expectation if you're playing a triple white card.
Yeah, that means you just have to mutilate your mana base a bit in order to get this thing to reprocess.
Yeah, if you're in mono white, it's more than a bit. I can say that from experience. There are certain cards that maybe it's a bit easier to include. Mugate, for example, is a really easy addition for this, though you do kind of have to put your opponent doesn't have Mugate, because then you have 2 Mugates. And there's the occasional just kind of easy inclusion with various pain lands that aren't too hard to include. Just kind of also just kind of good value lands, man lands. The explore lands are pretty good.
Aren't they tapped?
Yeah, they're tapped, but ETB Explore is just pretty darn good.
Like you have to play a bunch of tap lands in your white deck.
Yeah, I mean this isn't necessarily a aggro card. Definitely not finding, because like the process is a pretty value oriented thing. So you could totally play this like like I was playing it turn 3 after, say, Fox of the Mushroom Forest. And that's pretty nice synergy. You remove any blockers, get the Fox hit in. The Fox is still enabled to counter stuff for free. If you're playing it outside of mono white, which is more reasonable than might be expected, I don't think the reprocess is that big of cost because you have a lot more dual lands that you're playing to fix your mana already.
I mean, like, it doesn't even have to be lands. It's just any mana source. You can just spend mana from treasures or artifacts or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have straight like pay up mana lying around, or, I guess Dawson mana maybe.
Weeping Lotus mana.
Yeah, Weeping Lotus. Weeping Lotus make a treasure a Lotus Petal.
It makes a Lotus Petal.
Okay, so nice synergy there with various treasure cards. Rare lines, of course, also work. And I mean, you don't need everything to make white because the process is white and both triple white and a colorless. So you can definitely throw in a swamp and be happy with it.
So what about if you just ignore the reprocess cost and just play this in mono white as is? Because like if you look at it, it's still a really good card. Like it's 3/2 and then banish your priest except it hits non-land permanents instead of just creatures.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like valid to do that. I'm not quite sure if it's actively good to do so.
I mean, like, what is it competing with? Thailand? That's like the other 3-mana exile something on ETB creature, right?
Yeah, so there's Kailan. There's also stuff like Verdict of the Council. I mean, you will have to be a bit more limited if you're playing options outside of this. But like Verdict of the Council giving an anthem is really strong.
Yeah, but like you're running Verdict alongside Thailand in the Oxbox deck anyways, and it doesn't come with a body.
Yeah. I mean, Verdict has particular synergy if you're playing a specifically aggressive deck, and this is not. I don't think this is that great of an aggressive card. Like 2 toughness is not easy to get through blockers with, and if this trades off, then you will lose the you give your opponent back the card.
Right.
And also just doesn't work too well with the current white aggressive cards. It's not a soldier or a knight being the most extreme examples. But admittedly, you can play what's the 2-drop that sacks doing in battle creatures stuff?
Underpass Sentinel.
Yeah, Underpass Sentinel. So if you play turn 1 creature, turn 2 Underpass, turn 3 Vanguard, attack with Underpass, give Vanguard a counter, then maybe that works out really well because you kind of protect the Vanguard with Sentinel. Sentinel can get in pretty easily because you just play Vanguard. That's some nice synergy there.
Yeah.
But there are a good amount of 3-drops that Vanguard is competing with. I mean, we mentioned Kailan. Verdict Council. There's also stuff like Seto-san, which is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But moving on to another pretty interesting white card, we have Centurion.
Say that 3 times fast.
Centurion.
Sure, you did it.
Let's see. So this is a Cascade-like.
Actually, someone did play this card against me once. They flipped 28 cards before they found their 2-drop, so that was funny.
And what was their 2-drop?
I forgot actually.
Was it perhaps Profane Emissary?
Wait, how did you know?
Crazy. So obviously 2-drops are what you're looking to fetch off this. Since it gets you 2 copies of a 2-drop, so you want one that's really, really good.
The Profane Emissary, I guess. That's really, really good.
Yeah, Profane Emissary is really good. I mean, you could also use this for its like quote unquote intended purpose and grab a Centurion Legion.
Is that card good?
It exists. You can play it.
I think it's understated. It's not even base 2/2.
I think it's probably makes a bit more sense to be grabbing stuff like Financier or Pronouncers Preserves. Maybe you could also just kind of tech your choices. So we're just talking about Fox and Mushroom Forest. Maybe that's a good thing to find off it. because if you have like 3 Boxing Mushroom Force in play, then your opponent's gonna have trouble resolving stuff. You also just grab your Hate Bear of choice, maybe even slide into like Confining Priest. Maybe have like a mobile slot.
Well, I mean, that requires you to not play any other 2-drops, right? Or anything that's 2 or less.
I mean, it's not maybe not crazy to play multiple things that this could hit. Because I mean, I don't think there's any like particular card that like you're desperate to find on 2. A lot like getting a free 2-drops is good if the 2-drops good to just play good 2-drops.
Where's the wisdom right there?
Definitely does restrict your choices for 1-drops. Probably don't want any 1-drop creatures, but I don't think that's too bad if your base white Chronicles of Hits Kitsune isn't hit by this, and it's a very good card. Also does buffer copy, because copy will be a token.
Right.
Obviously, like if you're playing Profane MSA, you're happy playing black discard on turn 1. But yeah, just generally a pretty solid card. Also does dodge. Is a cast trigger, so it does dodge counter spells a little bit. If you want to really dig deep, you can say that it reveals prophecy cards too. But again, that's mostly just see prophecy.
Is there any good prophecy cards after Weave's nerf, other than prophecy or like seek prophecy?
Nothing that you'd want to be playing in general.
Isn't there like that 0-mana Stormcrow?
Yeah, there's a Stormcrow with prophecy 0. But again,
called.
I think it's like Stormwing Raven or something.
Oh yeah, right.
But that's not drawing that card feels really bad. So, and also you don't want to be playing with Centurion because that's a 2-drop.
Two Stormcrows. How do you even beat that?
I don't know. It'd be pretty tough. But you want to leave some mercy for your opponent. So moving on, we have yet another white card. We have Journey Beyond, which reanimates a 3-drop and flickers something you have.
They return in a turn, right? Or no, they return instantly?
They return instantly.
Okay, so 3-mana instant. You can pull off a lot of tricks with that.
So it does return tapped, but hopefully shouldn't matter too much. Just prevents kind of ambush blocking. But this is really good for setting up synergy. So, I mean, you've been playing a lot of Paddle Scatterer and Pronounceable Observes.
Yeah.
And those are obviously nice if you have them in play together. So you reanimate one, you flicker the one you have in play. Very nice.
And they entered at the same time. So, like, if you have a Pronouncer in play and also a Pronouncer in your yard, then you get to do the attack thing where you beckon into it and they enter at the same time and you get 4 tokens in total instead of just 3.
Yep, and that's very nice. Obviously, if you don't have one in your yard, it becomes pretty kind of sad, but
unfortunately it does not hit lands,
if you don't have one in play. Not land, yeah.
Okay.
If you want to set up maybe some more like degenerate synergies, you can like Sphinx's Authority plus political
opportunist.
Yeah.
But then like you're going into you're only going to 2 colors.
Yeah, so you can cycle Sphinx's Authority turn 1, you Opportunist turn 2, and you Journey Beyond turn 3. Your opponent has no cards in hand.
Wait, speaking of blue creatures, this thing gets back Kyone, and Kyone hasn't been nerfed yet.
Hasn't been nerfed yet. Yes. It does get back Kyone. Kyone's pretty darn good card. This just works with a lot of things, I think, generally.
So get back Kyone, flash this thing back if you cast one other spell. No, you have to cast 2 more spells. Never mind.
More generally, you can also, I think, maybe more naturally, you can play this in just like a blink-oriented deck with the end of turn Aetherize card. Yeah.
Tenuous Existence, or is that some other?
Rippling Curtain.
Oh,
sorry.
I mean, you can also play with Tenuous Existence in a blink-based deck.
Yeah, absolutely. But so Rippling Curtain with all the non-creature based Aetherize Likers. So this gives pretty good redundancy there, where they kill your Rippling Curtain and you say, no, you did not kill my Rippling Curtain.
You get Flare Blitz back as well, or you get the Flicker Flare Blitz as well.
Yep, lots of nice powerful stuff there. Does maybe crowd your 3-drop slot a bit, but and maybe is more of a sideboard card if your opponent's killing your stuff a bunch, but is maybe the strongest there, if anything. Moving out of the white cards, we have Hail to the Queen,
which is an enchantment.
Yeah, so I think I'll admit that this is the card I understand least what to do with in the set, but it is pretty blatantly pretty powerful.
I mean, so
any ideas?
I mean, it's an edict for 3 mana, so if you have a 1-drop, I guess you can like play it on turn 4 and then copy the 1-drop. Like if you have a Seeker of Untouched Beauty, I mean, you get to get the Seeker Death trigger while also making your opponent sack something, I guess.
Yeah, so definitely I think cheaper creatures are probably best for this. Seeker's a good call. Does absolutely work very well with this. I mean, there are a good amount of aristocratic cards, and Volatile Stonework is also pretty excellent for this.
Right, blow up 2 creatures. No, actually, no. They sack first, so
yeah, I guess they sacked the thing Stonework did, but I mean, you get them out Stonework, so it's something. Maybe with like, I don't know. I just think this card's really interesting. I don't actually know what the hell to make of it. That seems like definitely a card that maybe there's enough synergy with it that this goes in deck and it makes total sense, and it is absolutely insane in it. And I would not be surprised if that happens.
I mean,
in the
it's
least.
actually it's kind of like Go in that like if you have a Profane Emissary with this thing out, it kind of gets really annoying to kill it.
Yeah,
Right?
Chagall's a pretty good call. Does pretty similarly to Chagall, except you don't have to name anything, and instead of drawing a card, it's 1 mana more, but has this edict effect.
Well, the thing is, you have to like actually pay for the creature as it dies, so it's way more restricted in timing.
Yeah, that's true, but way less or way harder to turn off. Because Chagall, if your opponent just
you have to keep
leaves them in play
You have to keep your
or
mana
exiles
up
them.
during your opponent's turn if you want to like make your guy survive during your opponent's turn, right? So it's like it's not.
Yeah, I guess
That's
that's
good.
fair. Maybe you can play with like some treasures. Maybe like Weeping Lotus is interesting with it. Maybe I don't know.
Pronouncer. I mean, Pronouncer is pretty good to
Yeah,
copy.
Pronouncer. And I think, or just maybe stuff like a Autumnal Watch. Like I think maybe you intend to sacrifice on your turn. So Autumnal Watch goes pretty hard with this.
Yeah.
You know. Moving on to cards, I think we know a bit more what to do with. We have Orc Soulweaver, which is
It's triple black, and it cares about black spells. So I guess what deck it goes in.
villainy, right?
Yeah. Does it go in villainy?
I don't know. I think it's the villain to villainy in some respects. I think I personally find it more natural in what Mono Black Poison midrange. Not that that's a exceptionally popular deck, but just kind of black midrange in general. I think like this card maybe more than villainy. I think villainy is typically creatureless.
Yeah.
And this means that your like violent collapses look a bit less happy. But this card does a lot. In particular, I think the -1/-1 counters and the excellent cards in graveyard modes add a lot of utility to mid-range decks, because needing to play removal and needing to answer what your opponent does are like the two kind of big issues mid-range decks run into. I think, where they don't really want to be playing Pithwelt because it's not like really proactive, or similarly any kind of removal in general. Because you're stuck with a couple of removal spells in hand versus in a bad matchup,
Yes.
and that's really bad.
So,
But
so
that's or something.
So that's why mid-range decks play creatures that also act as removal spells.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mono Black didn't really have that many options for it. Soulbreaker Malkatesh is just an edict, so it's not super consistent. But here you can kind of machine gun down stuff with like your excess discard spells and whatnot.
Well, you have to like untap with this guy first.
Yeah, admittedly, Mono Black's pretty good at hitting its land drops because Bloodjade Prophet is a draw 3. So it's not unreasonable to be playing this plus something else on like 6 lands or whatever.
But that's like really late in the game.
Yeah, but kind of the thing about Mono Black is that you're playing a bunch of discard, so you are getting late in the game. At least the hope would be that you're getting to at least turn 5 or turn 6 as you're beating your opponent down with your infectious egos and whatnot.
What about the card draw mode? Like, how risky is it? How much can you use it before you just have to stop?
I think maybe this is like a bit controversial, but I think the card draw mode might be the worst mode.
Really? You don't like cards?
I think the thing is that you have a lot of ways to. I think mainly it's Bloodjade Prophet being a bit like counteractive with the card draw mode. Just because you are paying 6 life with Bloodjade Prophet every time.
Really? Like, you're never gonna not pay for Bloodjade?
I think more often than not, if you're playing Bloodjade Prophet in Mono Black, you're paying 6 life. I think if that was just your go-to, then you'd be right more often than wrong. And this does and the thing is that instead, if you're drawing cards, you're not doing a different mode, and the different other modes are pretty good. So, and like, admittedly, it's like pretty good if you like Bloodjake Prophet gets countered or just don't draw it, but the other modes are just generally pretty darn good in general. Gives you a lot of value, prevents your opponent from doing a lot of things. I think they're all like reasonably close though.
Oh, that's a sign of good. That's a sign of a well-designed card. Then
Absolutely. Of course, the design is always in the bottom left, so props to Zangy. We haven't been mentioning the designers, but
we
you always find them down
should
there.
give props to everyone who managed to get a card into this set because there was a decent number of submissions.
Absolutely.
But anyways, moving on.
So another card that kind of goes into Mono Black Poison Midrange is Mistress of Black Orchid. Very reminiscent of the Dark Confidant kind of thing. Works very well with the Mind Falters. Yeah. It's a good 2-drop in general. Really has some amount of bad matchups. A 2/1 is pretty abusable. Let's say like Rapacious Rattler, but I think pretty straightforward. Draw 2 cards. Is a good value 2-drop.
Yeah, I mean, if you would play Dark Confidant, you would play this thing.
Yeah, if you can trigger the poison, give your opponent poison, absolutely. It's also pretty good removal bait. So, because if your opponent's playing with a removal, they kind of have to kill this. Else you're going to draw a whole bunch of cards. So it does make it, you'll say, Orc Soul Weaver a bit safer.
I mean, you die if this thing poisons you, so you do die in 10 turns.
Oh no, yeah, after you've drawn 10 cards, you'll die.
And this guy also has poisonous one, so if you don't draw your Mind Falters, you can still play this guy and attack with it to turn on your other poison levers. Like
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see. So moving on, we have Treacherous Warden.
So ETB 3-drop Entomb something. First thing I thought of when I saw this card was Tomb Steward, which is the other card that the other 3-drop that ETB's Entomb something.
Yeah, so I think this has a couple upsides over Tomb Steward. Firstly, it has a whole second mode that's more relevant, I think, than Tomb Steward. Getting Wooburg is pretty hard in general, even if the Chosen One ability is pretty good. And I think it's just generally not worth going either way for the Chosen One. But here it's just extra upside, drain for 2 every time you reanimate something. Also does trigger on itself, which is nice. And also the change of stats from 2/2 to 3/1, I think is a reasonably good upside. Makes it a lot more threatening. Also makes it trade for more stuff, which is nice.
I mean, what are you grabbing off this thing?
So if you're playing, I think maybe naturally this is some amount of, there's a idea to play this in like Unearth, and of course there's a bunch of different Unearth targets so you can grab. Maybe that's not the best thing because this is something that you would need to Unearth. And if you're playing a lot of the like kind of loaded ground mid-range decks have a lot of interchangeable pieces to make them more consistent. Outside of Unearth, I think maybe a good thing to grab would be like value pieces. Descend on the Helpless, for example, has really good synergy with this. Because of course it's Bin's removal. The Memento is very strong. Gives you Cormon, which does not trigger the drain effect, but the ETB does because it reanimates something. You can also reanimate this. So you can Cormon, reanimate this, it triggers on itself. So you drain for 2, and then you bid another Descend on the Helpless. And you do it all again next turn. You so desire.
I mean, your opponent needs to have enough Descend targets because this guy has 3 power.
Yeah, but I mean, generally that's not too much of an issue. You can always, if you really want to, I mean, of course, whatever. If your opponent's not willing to kill this, that's fine because it's fucking them for 3. And you can always reanimate something else. I mean, Cormon can hit your opponent's graveyard too, so you don't need to play that many creatures. But I think that's generally where you'd be looking to play this card, and more if you're not trying to like fully abuse the Entomb, because of course Entomb is a pretty abusable effect.
I mean, I guess if you're not in mono black, you can run stuff like the Flames Approach, which is also a really good Memento card.
Absolutely. You can also bin Reprise cards if you really want to. Hassel's Maneuver and Seekers of the Core, like Coast and Court, rather, I think. And stuff like that. Good amount of graveyard value you can grab.
Wait, this guy's a demon. This guy's a 3-drop demon. You can Profane Mystery into it.
Absolutely true as well.
I didn't notice this guy was a demon because the art didn't. I thought it was a human in the art.
Yeah, so you can turn this turn 3 this off profane, say. Maybe if you're playing one of those like basically creatureless profane decks, that's maybe interesting. To work with like Descent on the helpless, maybe.
No, Descent has anti-synergy with Profane Emissary. You should be grabbing like the Flames approach instead, or some other.
Wait, why does Descent have anti-synergy?
Because it kills your own Profane Emissary more likely than not.
I mean, profane necessarily has 4 power. I mean, I think it's pretty likely that your opponent has something that's 4 less power.
You can also grab Flames approach, or actually Hatchel's maneuver in the Tyrant's Breath deck.
Yeah, that's also absolutely a good call. Moving on, we have a couple of decent legendary payoffs. We have Henros Royal Herald, as well as the Pylius. The Pylius is the Theros Atlantean Arisen bonus sheet card. And yeah, so that's a lot of legendary payoffs.
So let's see. Henrose, I guess it gets big off legendaries, and then it's only 3 mana to activate its ability, and then it puts it into play, and then it goes into your hand if you can't put it into play. Wait, this is really good. Like this is guaranteed value every turn. And it's like 6 cards.
Does a lot. 6 cards, yeah, definitely a lot. Doesn't trigger its own. It does not trigger itself if you use the ability. You do need to cast legendary spell. Can't just put in play.
Does that matter? Like you're just grabbing legendaries every turn. Like you're directly putting them into play.
Yeah, I mean it's good value, but you can't really just determine what you find. And I mean there's the question of, well, what legendary cards are you finding?
Just slap this guy into the 5-color legend aggro deck.
Well, I mean, I feel like this is not a very good aggressive card. If you, at least the ability is not great there, because a lot of aggro is determined on the synergies, right? And if you're just finding one thing a turn, even if it's a 3-drop, well, like, is that really good enough to out aggro someone? Like, you're not really using your hand at all.
I guess.
It's definitely a very strong card that does a lot, though. Does go off legendary lands too. Then there's not actually that many legendary lands that are worth playing. Probably not that hard to like include 4 or 5, but past that it becomes a bit rough. It also does instantly gain you life, which is pretty nice. Incidental life gain is always appreciated. And yeah, it's really hard to run you out of cards if you have this, because as you mentioned, yeah, it's only 3 mana. So if you're in the late game scenario, and you're activating this twice, well, yeah, that's gonna definitely outvalue your opponent.
Yeah.
The Pylius is pretty similar too. ETB or attacks also looks at the top 6 and then finds the legendary. Doesn't only put it in your hand, but doesn't cost mana to do so. To activate the ability. And then it's a 3 mana 4/5 vehicle, crew 2. Pretty easy to make work in a deck. Will by Henrose, triggers Henrose, gives you more stuff to help Henrose.
You know what those cards remind me of? They remind me of Emma.
Okay, so yeah, Emma doesn't look at top 6, only looks at top 5, man. But yeah, all legendaries, a whole bunch of value. I think it's almost too much value, really.
Really? I mean, I feel like the 5-color Legends aggro deck never really got anywhere, even though it was really good, because sometimes you just low roll. Like, sometimes you flip a bunch of redundant legendaries off the Emma, or you just don't flip enough things off the Emma.
But the thing is that if you're starting a deck with 4 Henros, 4 Pylius, 4 Emma, you're never going to run out of cards, ever. But, like, these cards aren't that great at killing your opponent. All the value is in the value they generate, the card advantage. Yeah. And you do need to kill your opponent to at least stop them from killing you. So I feel like it's almost overkill to be playing all of them, even if they're all great cards. And then, I mean, Emma is probably the easiest to not play, because it would make your mana base more strained if you're not playing all legendary lands, so you're not able to play like interact spells. It's also Jeskai, so you're just planning on playing 3 colors, you lose access to like Valdez, which is a pretty strong thing to find off the Pylius.
Wait, can you cast Valdez off? Or it's put into play? Never mind, it doesn't cast. Okay.
Yeah. So Valdez isn't great off Henros, is very good off Pylius. So a bit of tension there, but I think Valdez is pretty naturally card you want to play in this deck. Beyond that, I don't necessarily know where you go, because if you're just playing the Pylius and Henros, and it's Valdez, you're just in 2 colors. I don't know if there's a good 3rd color. Maybe you can play Dawson, potentially. as a pretty standard kind of white-black adjacent card.
Yeah, like Dawson ramps you, so you can get more activations out of your hand rolls.
Yep. But there's definitely a kind of mid-range-esque core here. And you can absolutely play it in aggro too. I mean, Henrose does grow pretty fast if you're playing cheap creatures. Even if I don't think the ability is necessarily at its best in aggro. Moving on, we have Keep of Secret Havens. So I can't help but notice, Ricky, you've been playing a lot of auras in your green-based decks.
Yeah, but they're all land auras, and this guy puts educate onto creatures, right? So, I mean, how good is it anyways? It doesn't even ramp you.
Well, I mean, it does ramp you. I mean, creatures are known to sometimes make mana.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you might think, but Logger Recluse doesn't work with land or doesn't work with creature laws. I don't understand. But there's but people who are well versed in Magic the Gathering lore might know that there's these things called mana dorks.
Holy crap, mana dorks exist, and they're actually
that this
playable.
is ranked with. But I think even if you don't necessarily want to play mana dorks, I know you have aversion to them.
Yeah, but like I'm kind of forced to play mana dorks now that Logger Recluse has been nerfed because there's just not enough 1 mana ramp cards other than Primal Resurgence.
But I think even without them, this is a pretty reasonable card. Petal Scatterer, for example, gets really big with even just Pronounce Preserves and Primal Resurgence, pretty consistently being a 5/5 or so. And this not only grows your Petal Scatterer, but it also grows itself. So I don't think it's too unreasonable to get this to be quite large. You can, of course, put the Adjudicate Auras on itself, and it has Ward 2. Is slightly restricted. Only auras entering the first time each turn, so have to spread the auras out a little bit. But I think this isn't too unreasonable to make like a 2-mana 5/5 with that kind of shell.
Yeah, but
and
like,
that's pretty good.
Why do you need a 2-mana 5/5 in your ramp deck?
Well, what if you made it not a ramp deck?
But then why are you playing all those ramp cards?
I mean, Petal Scatterer, yeah, it ramps you, but maybe you don't go to Leyland Alpha, you just go to a 5-drop. You go to Nova Heart Guardian or some random dragon that hits your opponent in the face really hard, or a Sign of Flourishing, or
Sign of Flourishing.
What have you. Both Behemoth. I've been seeing you play that a little bit. And you just beat your opponent down in the face.
Huh, interesting.
But it does kind of shift the deck to a more stompy kind of focus, but the deck already kind of plays like that already. I mean, Leyland Alpha is basically a stompy card, except it's more expensive than most stompy cards. So, yeah. Moving on, we have another creature-oriented ramp card with Strange Jungle.
Well, I mean, technically it's creature-oriented, but you really wish it wasn't. So Strange Jungle is a 3-mana card that ramps you by 2, which is kind of unique because most 3-mana ramp cards only ramp you by 1. So it's mostly comparable to the Tower over the Tower Little Pig combo, where you tower over the sky and then free cast a Little Pig's Big Adventure, which is also a 3-mana ramp 2. And the main advantage of this card over something like RFE is that RFE only ramps 1. So you can do something like turn 1, you play a turn 1 ramp, and then turn 2, you play Strange Jungle or Tower over the Sky, go up to 5 lands. Turn 3, you drop your land and then play your Layer and Alpha for 6.
And that sounds pretty good, playing Layer and Alpha on turn 4 with one other card.
No, it's not turn 4, it's turn 3.
Well, I mean, if you have I was thinking Layer and Alpha plus this is turn 4, but if you have Resurgence 2, then it's turn 3, and that's even scarier. Obviously, this does open up more avenues for interaction. Of course, you don't want to be seeing your opponent play a Metal Munch. Metal Munch would make this card pretty sad. There's also ways to make use of the creature part of this. You can play it with, again, Sign of Flourishing. Gives you 2 landfall triggers. The lands become 0/1s, and then they get buffed up by Scion.
Well, usually you'd be ramping into Scion with this thing, so the lands will be already in play by the time this enters.
Yeah, but if you have an additional copy, say you Strange Jungle, you play Scion, then you play a land afterwards, and you only get 1 trigger, but then you exit copies of Strange Jungle, give you what, +2/+2.
Sure, and then you play your Tower of the Sky Little Pig, and then you get 2 more lands, I guess. Except those things aren't forests, so never mind, it doesn't work.
So admittedly, it is maybe a bit difficult to make use of 0/1 tokens, but I think generally it might be good to try and make use of them in some ways. Try and make them a benefit rather than a drawback to make the card even better. But yeah, if you just want to use it as ramp, it's not that unreasonable to do so.
It actually reminds me a lot of re-nerf Untouched Wilds, because that card was usually just doing ramp 2 on turns on 3 mana. Like sometimes you can high roll and ramp 3, but usually you're just ramping 2, and that's like just good enough most of the time.
So moving on to another green card, we have the Tale of Shady Cove, which is a big slug.
Big slug. I mean, it definitely gums up the board.
Yeah. So I like this card. I have a lot of. I think Death Touch on big creatures is a bit underrated. Makes them really, really hard to like multi block and stuff like that. Just wins the board state really easily. Wormcoil is the main card I'm thinking of here. Tale of Shady Code is kind of interesting because it's like kind of almost like a trash storm type thing where you like either get the destruction or you get the 3/3. Though I guess trash storm you do blow up your own things to get the 3/3, and I don't know. But I think this card's really solid. The only problem is that Alfie and Leyland Alpha exist. In particular, this kind of how a lot of the ramp decks work is that, and I think why Leyland Alpha is such a good ramp payoff, is that Leyland Alpha isn't actually the top of the curve. The top of the curve is Alfie or Tower of the Sky, where you're curving Leyland into something else. So it doesn't need to be as necessarily consistent as a single win con, because you can play more win cons after it. So even if this is better than Leyland as like a single win con, it's more difficult to deal with, and it does more at say Wrath or something. It's kind of hard to beat Leyland Alpha plus these coalesce spells. Where I think this does shine though is in say Reanimator, where there's less follow-up, and well, this is really nice to deal with. If you turn 3 this, well, your opponent has to sack a land, and they're probably staying down 13 power. Not easy to deal with.
I mean, maybe they just sack a treasure or something.
And a land. And
Yeah.
well, and if they sack a treasure, then they're losing mana, and you still have 10 power in play, and still two-shotting them.
Yeah.
It does start your opponent behind a fair bit. And I think that's reasonably valuable in Reanimator, because the current reanimation targets of Tyrant Tributes and Azos kill really slowly, even though their interaction is really good.
Do they kill that slowly? I mean, they're like pretty big, right?
I mean, Azos is a 5/5. Like the thing about Azos is that, and Tyrant, is that they don't kill with a temporal resuscitation.
They don't.
Because temporal resuscitation gives you 2 attacks with them, I believe. Because vanishing is one of the last is removed, right?
Yeah.
So temporal resuscitation gives 3 counters with vanishing. So untap, your first untap, 2 counters, swing, 1 counter, swing, and then sacked. So Azos is only dealing 10 damage, which is not a lot.
That's hilarious.
Whereas Tale of Shady Cove is dealing like 30, whatever.
Yeah.
More than is necessary to kill your opponent. Moving on, we have have you pronounced it?
Yeah.
The Daring Blade. I think this card's really darn neat. I think it enables a lot of tempo-based kind of strategies with a lot of the more powerful 2-drops in the format. Just got kind of running through them. Sophia sees a good amount of play. It's a very strong card, and 3 plus Sophia does a lot of damage really fast. Then you have stuff like Chile, which isn't super popular, but really solves a lot of problems for because it unblockability. Make sure that you can get a demon out. Also then gives the demons unblockability. Well, not quite unblockability, but I mean, there's not that many 4-mana creatures seen play. And it also works with like Shinrei as another solid 2-drop. They're both rogues, so synergy there.
Yeah, it goes in ninjas.
But in general, has that kind of nice synergy with creatures that want to hit your opponent, and also puts a pretty good clock. Unblockable 2/1s are pretty good clocks. They're not necessarily the best in aggro decks or like fully based aggro decks, but in tempo, they're unblockable 2/1s for 1 are really darn good.
I mean, this card's a shoe-in for the ninjas deck, right?
Maybe, probably. I don't know. I'm not. I haven't seen a ninjas list updated in a little while.
Actually, do ninjas even run 1-drops? I thought they're entirely on 2-drops due to Monument.
Yeah, I believe so. So you would probably want to be running without Monument, just because Monument does require a lot of creatures, and only works with it and 1 other creature types.
But then you're
So
running ninjas without monument?
well, you just don't play ninjas. Play a different black base tempo deck.
With
Um,
ninjas cards, right?
I doesn't need to be ninjas.
I
No.
mean, like the cards with deception because this guy enables deception really well.
Other than that, I don't think Ninja even plays that many deception cards. Unless I'm forgetting some. I suppose we can jump ahead and talk to Maileye? Heirloom Pilferer,
Yeah,
which is a bonus card from House of the Two World.
which has
Which
deception.
yeah, Planeswalk with Deception. Pretty novel. I think this works. It is a bit separated in the curve from Re, so not the strongest synergy just based on mana cost difference, but definitely likes having things hit in. The Deception's really nice. I think this card's really cool. I think when you first look at this card, the most striking thing is the -2, because -2 is a pretty exciting ability.
Yeah.
Because if your opponent's on large sheet spells, you're at least hitting for 4 with melee and the other creature. Well, I guess if you're hitting with the Re, it's at least 4. But if you're just hitting in, you're hitting for at least 3. And a lot of decks play a good amount of 1-drops, so maybe you can hit multiple spells with the -2, and you can cast both of them, which is pretty exciting. I think honestly the +1 might be the better ability,
Really?
just because the tapping down any permanent for a full turn cycle is really nasty. Because this can also tap down lands, so it really restricts your opponent's options always. And dealing with the 5-mana planeswalker that has a pretty strong protection ability, that doesn't only stop creatures, that also can stop like spells or what have you, is really hard to deal with. 5 loyalty is a lot. It's potentially coming down to 4. And if you can untap with melee, it becomes even nastier. Because you're going to be hit by a 3/2 indestructible again.
Right.
And then if you tap down a creature, you can tap down a different creature, and then you have 2 creatures locked down, and it gets nastier. Yeah.
Yeah. Seems solid.
But speaking of tempo decks, a lot of tempo decks live and die on the 2-drops, which admittedly there aren't that many good 2-drops in MSEM for tempo decks at the moment. Bit of a lack. I mean, we mentioned stuff like Chile and Sophia and Chinray,
We
but
got Veilable
those are
Meddler.
maybe value oriented. But in MSJ, we have not 1, not 2, but 3 different mono blue tempo oriented cards where you play them on 2 and they can take over the game if unanswered. So, and those are Manipulative Waves, Mere Soul Mage, and Teema Falconeer, sorry. Anyone you want to talk about first?
A Manipulator of Waves because that's the one you designed.
Sure. So Manipulative Waves, kind of the gimmick here is that it's a unblockable creature that continues making tokens. But if you attack with tokens alongside it, loses its unblockability, as the unblockability is based on Slipstream. So there's kind of a tension there where you can't swing it all out with everything. The token's also based on graveyard size and manipulated middle in every attack. So the longer you wait, the more tokens and you get, and the bigger the tokens are. So I think this more naturally goes in tempo-oriented decks than pressure-oriented decks, just because this is kind of fragile.
Is there a difference between those two? Because Pressure is a tempo deck, right?
Depends how you're building pressure. I think pressure does end up being a bit of a mid-range deck. Just because you need to spend a lot of resources filling your yard to make like Makuza really good. They don't have that many slots dedicated to interaction. Like when I was playing blue-green pressure, the only interaction I had in that deck was single.
Right.
And I think tempo decks generally want a bit more interaction than that. But Manipulator, if you can play it turn 2 and protect it, and I guess also protect your graveyard. Tokens are 0/0, so if you get hit by a Sealed Riftway, they'll go poof.
That sounds like a really big problem, actually, because yeah, if Sealed Riftway can now wipe your board, then now you can't really rely on your guys to win.
Yeah, but presumably if Riftway wipes your board, then you still have a Manipulator, hopefully, and you can rebuild your board again.
With your 0-card graveyard?
I mean, yeah, you're milling 3 every turn.
The first
tempo decks, a couple cantrips.
The first attack doesn't even get you anything.
Well, I mean, you only need 2 cards in the graveyard to start like generate tokens.
I guess.
But doesn't sound like you're super on board with the manipulators. Let's move on to Mere Soul Mage, which makes you a token every turn, but this time it's based on spellcasts.
So it's basically like a monster mentor, except it only triggers once a turn.
Yeah, only triggers once a turn and only triggers on your turn.
I mean, wait, it prevents you from playing at instant speed unless you want to unless you have enough spells to also do stuff in addition to, or do stuff on your turn in addition to holding up a cosmic sinkhole.
Yeah, so presumably you'd want to be, if you like played this turn 2 and you can untap with it, so you want to play like a cantrip on your turn, then hold up counter spells to the opponent's turn, and do that for a couple turns maybe. And then eventually you have like, if you have like 2 tokens, and you suddenly have 3 pass creatures, and then you can go all out and throw all your burn at cantrips and stuff and a lot of damage in. That's why the play pattern you want.
That requires a really good hand, or a really well-mixed hand for that to happen.
Yeah, familiarly, you're presumably playing a lot of cantrips with this, so maybe you can sculpt that kind of hand.
So like instead of playing it as a temple deck, you play it as a prowess deck, like a blitz deck or something.
Yeah, I was thinking more so like, I guess kind of. I was thinking you weren't really playing as an aggro deck, but if you want to, you can play a bunch of like 0-cost spells, for example, like through the Ashen Gate is 0 cost. So it turns to Mere Soul Mage through the Ashen Gate, gets your token. Social Graces, if you are setting up on turn 1, you can trigger Mere Soul Mage on turn 2, and then if you can untap with it, becomes really nasty. You just got 2 1/1 prowess creatures, and you're going to get a third. Even your opponent can deal with what you have with Mere Soul Mage, and you do a lot of damage that way. That's maybe interesting as well.
Actually, it seems really slow if you do it like that, because the guys don't come into play with haste. So yeah, it's actually probably too slow for prowess blitz style decks.
Yeah, probably, I mean, if you're calling them blitz, yeah, it's probably anything that's 2 mana is probably too slow.
Like I'm just thinking of the red blue prowess decks from that Augur played.
Yeah, did those even play any 2-drops?
They played Massive Tranquility, I think, some of the time after some cards got nerfed.
Yeah, I think Master was in the sideboard sometimes, but I think those were like all 1-drops, and so yeah, those are probably a bit too fast for this card. But if you can protect this, then a Moss Dementia, of course, is pretty nuts. This is much more strict than Moss Dementia, but 4 mana cheaper. I think also in a better color are pretty good upsides. But if you don't like that one either, then you can move on to Team of Falconeer.
So when it enters, it makes a bird. Okay, and then whenever so it triggers for each flying creature, ship player or planeswalker. Okay, this guy grows really quickly.
So of course you can play this in flyers.
I don't think this thing's good in flyers, because flyers wants to get your flying guys buff, not have a really big ground guy.
Yeah, maybe it will require a bit of a rebuild with flyers, but I mean it goes pretty fast. Though merely it also makes your opponent's ground creatures more relevant, but so there's some tension there. But if you're playing this as like a tempo card, where maybe you play with the Panya, so you go turn 1 Panya, turn 2 Falconeer, attack with Panya.
That sounds really good.
And then turn 3, you can just attack with your bird and your Panya, and then this goes twice, you scry 1 twice, and suddenly it's a 3/5, and you have your Cat Imaginer up, and that's kind of the dream scenario. If you don't have Panya, it loses a bit of its luster, but
you have plenty of flying 1-drops, right? You have like Accomplice. Antithesis Accomplice, right? That thing.
Yeah, Antithesis Accomplice is okay, yeah. Not terribly exciting, but definitely playable.
Yeah, I can see this working.
So you're fully on the Team of Falconeer train.
Yeah, and even Scries too, so you get better draws while you're whacking opponent with your flying 1/1s.
Yep. Also just generally pretty good blocker.
Yeah, hold down the ground while your flying guys do the work.
Let's see. So now moving on, we have Way of Water, which is a quench variant.
So of course, quench variants. First thing to think about is how does it compare to Portal Fracture, our quench variant of choice?
Yeah, Portal Fracture is, even if it's nerf, the kind of go-to. Key block kind of gets in there sometimes, but different color. It's not directly comparable. It's hard to say how important the flash is, because of course a lot of decks that play that want quenches play entirely at instant speed. Like this is in decks that don't play entirely at instant speed. This is much more interesting. Being able to drop a planeswalker on your opponent's turn. You can't use the ability, but you can untap and have all your mana up to protect it, which is interesting. And in general, having some amount of instant speed stuff going on in a deck that doesn't play too much in its speed is kind of valuable. And this has, I think, a bit less tension if you are getting up to like 5 or 6 mana than a lot of other cards that do that. Because of course you don't need to counterspell. You can just use this as a flash enabler, though it's not great if you do that. It does do some amount of work. You can also use this flash in the grass and stuff, which is pretty nasty.
Well, that requires a lot of mana, though, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
you have to be at 6 in order to flash in a wrath with this thing, and your opponent has to play a spell into it before they attack.
Well, I mean, this is okay. So up to 1 target spell.
Okay,
so you can play this just default.
Just as a quicken, 2 mana quicken, don't even draw a card.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, but I mean, flashing and Violent Collapse is only 5 mana. And it's hard to underestimate instant speed wraths. There's a reason that instant speed wraths are like for like 2 mana more than non-instant speed wraths.
So you know what this reminds me of?
What?
Witch's Invocation. So from what people have told me about Witch's Invocation in both formats it's fit in, like Custom Standard and MSEM. When the card first came out, people were super hyped about it, and then it just did nothing. So I'm wondering if the same thing will happen with Wave Water.
Yeah, so I think the main distinction I draw, even though I think maybe that ends up being the case, is that the immediate impact of playing Wave Water is much higher than the immediate impact of playing Witch's Invocation. Where people just play Quenches, right? Quench is a reasonable card that you can play.
Like vanilla Quench? I
mean, yeah, it's not like you're not excited about it, but it's not that bad.
Right.
Key Block is an entirely reasonable card to play. Portal Fracture is like maybe a bit more than a Quench, but even if it was just a Quench, it's not that bad. Even if you're not getting the tokens consistently, and playing on turn 2 or 3. And Wave Water has that as a base case, which is a fair bit better than Witch's Invocation's 2 mana draw card. Witch's Invocations does always give you the card's flash, which is definitely more valuable than just 1 turn. But I think the base case being a fair bit higher makes this analysis on Witch's Invocation not necessarily the same as as what analysis on Wave Water does. Additionally, I think it's easier to put Wave Water in your deck than Witch's Invocation, because this is your counterspell slot, right?
Right.
If you want a counterspell, you can just play Wave Water and happy with it, whereas Witch's Invocation, you need to find somewhere to put it in your deck, and it doesn't really do anything super tangible. So it's eating into other slots in your deck, like your win conditions or your filtering or your counterspells, or your interaction in general.
Right.
But it's entirely possible that this ends up being that the flash isn't as valuable as in general. And this is just Quench with a bit of upside that maybe you play Portal Fractures sometimes because you feel like it. Moving on, though, in the last stretch, Hoarding Crab. You like to mill.
I think everyone likes mill decks because they always want to see alternative win conditions, right?
Yeah, I know people just love people love poison decks. In fact, is fan favorite. The Hoarding Crab does a lot of interesting things. Unlike its crab companions in Counter Magic, this is a 0/3. So blocks a fair bit better. A lot of 2-power creatures early on in the game. This is going to protect your life total a fair bit, which is something Mill struggles with.
Wait, isn't like Rune Crab also a 0/3?
I thought there was 0.
Yeah, there's like Hedron Crab and Rune Crab, and like Hedron Crab's 0/2, Rune Crab's a 0/3, I think.
Okay, yeah, Rune Crab is 0/3. I'm apparently not up to date with my crab lore.
Don't worry, I haven't played Canon in forever either.
So Hoarding Crab, it does mill less than the landfall crabs. Does mill at least 2 a turn because you have 8 on land. Mill decks also play Spelling Secrets, so that's enchantment already. And Spelling Secret has particularly good synergy with Hoarding Crab because it's a 0 mana way to trigger Spelling Secrets. So you can fully hold up your cards for your opponent's turn. And Hoarding Crab is also very cheap, so if you draw more of them off Spelling Secrets, then you can just play them out. And Spelling Secrets is, I think, the main reason you play the mill, because it draws a lot of cards. Also works well. Where when I was playing Blue Black Mill, the main interaction that won me games was Spelling Secrets plus Compelling Prior, because that's for 2 mana, you're drawing 2 cards in turn cycle, which is really nasty. So anything that makes Spelling Secrets even better is appreciated.
So what about the other card types?
Yeah, you can those are a bit harder. Mill is fortunately a deck that I think can manage some deck changes. I don't think you necessarily need to play all the mill cards because, again, if you get Spilling Secrets online, you're drawing a lot of cards, so you don't need that much density. So maybe you can play some random, Weaving Lettuce or Ready for Anything or something.
Yeah, that's not bad. What about Planeswalkers?
I think there's some random mill planeswalkers. I'm not entirely up to date with them, unfortunately. I want to say there's one in ACA which just came out, but we'll have to wait for that set review. I guess it's probably worth mentioning that Pollitt Pools exists.
Right. Polypool exists. So so what you can get it up to 6 card types pretty easily, or quote unquote easily.
Yeah, so something like turn 1 Holding Crab, turn 2 Pollitt Pools, Holding Crab, and have a bit of Crab Raid. Or what my words.
Also have a rail line, so you can get your artifact out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Rail lines, cheating card types since they came out.
Get your crabs on
then you're
train.
milling a lot. The one thing that makes that kind of slows down this wave a bit is Unravel Fireweaver, which encourages 80 card decks, which Mill does not want to play against.
Hey, at least
I think
at
even
least
more than that.
At least Dreamsight got nerfed, so they don't have to deal with 140 card decks anymore.
That's true.
Unless there's a crazy guy playing a Dreamsight list, a Dreamsight 8-sack out there.
Also, Fireweaver is just generally pretty good against Mill because grab something, kill your crab, and then your crab dies and you're sad.
But you didn't have no backup other than the crab?
I mean, you'd prefer your crab not to die.
I mean, like in Modern, if your crab dies, what happens?
I don't know.
Me neither, I don't play Modern.
So moving on, we have Paint with Starflame. I think so. This is a pretty interesting card just in general. Modal card, you either get a 2/2 token with haste, which scries on attack, or you just get a bolt to face or planeswalker.
No lava spike.
I won. I think in general, this card's maybe a little bit underpowered compared to other bird cards in the format. Logger's Frenzy is just really good, for example.
Why doesn't this guy hit creatures too?
We'll probably maybe a bit too good. But what's I think most interesting about this card is that it works with Nexus possibilities. You can go turn 1 Nexus possibilities, turn 2 Paint with Starflame, get both modes, and then that's a really good clock. Turn 2 haste plus bolt, and you get 2 scry 1s.
Okay, sure.
And also,
okay, sure, but like, what deck are you playing that in? Because you're playing Nexus of Possibilities in a deck that cares about the clock.
Yeah, well, the thing is that middle decks generally burn you out. With Palisson and the card that Palisson is the card that copies modal spells pretty cheaply, as well as trying to remember the escalate card.
Yeah.
They as well as Wicked Blow. A lot of times modal decks end up just burning out using Nexus Possibilities mana mode to copy Wicked Blow 4 times.
Yeah.
To deal 15 to your opponent. So having more burn maybe makes modal like burn a possibility.
Maybe burn. Interesting.
There are a lot of modal cards, so maybe there's more to that, which is interesting. I'm not drawing it too long. We have Seer, Forged Lava, switching archetypes entirely. What's most notable about this card is that it's the only equipment in the format that costs 6 or more mana, and as you might expect, that makes it the best cheat target for equipment. And there is a cheat equipment card. There's a Goblin Welder for equipment, Cami Tribe Outfitter, which lets you Goblin Weld equipment for equipment. So yeah, you play Cami Tribe Outfitter turn 1, you turn 2 play equipment, then find a way to discard Seer, Forged Lava, and then you swap them and attack for 6.
And I guess and you hope it gets there?
I mean, you didn't spend many cards on that. Like,
you spent 3 cards on it, right?
You still have the outfit in play, right? The outfitter doesn't die. And it still has some decent use cases if you're playing a bunch of equipment.
Yeah, like if you discard a second copy of this, now you can start swapping them with outfitter.
Yeah, and get a whole bunch of pandas. And I mean, I have looked at Camo Tribe outfit decks just like without any cheat target. You just play a whole bunch of Death Pit trophies, for example, and you can cycle Death Pit trophies to discard lock the opponent.
Wait, is Camo Tribe outfitter instant speed?
It is, yes.
Wait, is Goblin Welder instant speed?
I believe so, yeah.
Huh, I always thought it was sorcery speed. Interesting. All right, I'm sold.
And there's a good amount of support for equipment in general. You have, of course, Don Hill Master is a good equipment grabber. Seto-san doesn't grab Seer, but grabs you the rest of the equipment package. Cinderblade is really good with Counter Outfitter. So because you can go like turn 2, for example, play discard spell, discard Seer. Turn 1, discard spell, discard Seer. Turn 2, Counter Outfitter, Cinderblade equip, tap, sack Cinderblade for Seer, which helps you just dodge sorcery speed to removal, which is nice. And also just in general, you're in the right colors for Dawson, so you're playing all these random equipment that you're happy sacking, so Dawson becomes much better.
Wait,
So lots of things around.
What discard outlet are you using for Seer? Or are you just using your own Death Pit trophy to discard?
Unfortunately, Death Pit trophy is opponent, I believe.
That's unfortunate.
There's like a decent amount of good discard. I mean, you have Gift of the Phoenix, you have
Creative Salvage?
Creative Salvage, yep. Which does make it a bit more limited, admittedly. You do need to play a bit of specific cards. But there's like, I think it's too hard to find discard outlets. I wouldn't be super surprised if there's a equipment that discards, for example. Arcanist Tome, loots on attack. I guess maybe there's not that many discard outlets for equipment or in equipment.
Okay.
But admittedly, the upside is pretty high, so
yeah, maybe just stick it into like a Kaelin Whirlwind deck and hope it gets there.
Also, like maybe it's not unreasonable to hardcast. I mean, you're already playing Dawson. I mean, 7 mana becomes a bit more reachable, but definitely Fame to Claim would be cheating out with something. I think there's also a quest that does it. Seek the Buried Relic, which is a 3 mana quest that, functionally speaking, you play 2 creatures and it cheats an equipment into play.
And attaches it to a creature you control.
Yep. Isn't necessary for Seer, because it does give you a Panda. I believe it actually unequips it from the creature you control and puts it all back onto Panda. It's funny, but that's another good option that isn't as like powerful, because this is probably doing it 10-4. It is a bit more tractable, but definitely a decent option. Gains you some life as well. Nice.
Okay.
Getting to the end, Visions of Sand and Steel. So I'm gonna try to sell this card. Because this card is pretty underpowered.
This should be 2 mana.
Okay, I don't trust that. I think it'd be pretty OP at 2 mana. But basically, the sales pitch for this card is that you play your Spawn Cohort, or your Ruin Delver, or your Profane MSA, or another one of these mid-range value creatures on turn 2. Turn 3, Visions of Sand and Steel. Attack with them. Your opponent's not going to kill your Swan Cohort, because, well, that's what you want. So it's going to stick around. Your attack with Stone Cohort is a 3/3. Good pressure. It's going to untap. So you're still going to have a defensive presence as well. And then eventually you'll culminate all these equipment, and then later on in the game you can throw it onto your Wrist of the Roses or your Valdez's that you have lying around, or something along those lines.
Okay, sure, but like, why are you running this card in your mid-range deck? This feels way more like an aggro card.
I mean, you can run an aggro. I mean, it does give you card types for Founding Hero, though unfortunately the attack triggers line up poorly, so you don't get double strike immediately. But this kind of doesn't quite give the oomph an aggro deck wants for 3-drop.
I mean, if it was 2 mana, it would have been great in aggro.
Oh yeah, it'd be nuts and everything.
Okay.
But at 3 mana, I think the fact that it gives you some amount of aggressive presence in decks that typically struggle with aggressive presence. Like if you're playing Swarm Cohort, you're not attacking. I mean, your Swarm Cohort is sitting there, and maybe in a creatureless matchup it does 10 to your opponent, but everywhere else it's doing 0.
Right.
Whereas here, suddenly it's dealing 3, 4, 5, and your opponent's like, shoot, I need to kill this Swarm Cohort. Sorry. And then, oops, you toot up your Resta, you slam your Resta, and then you equip all your equipment on your Resta and give it life.
How much mana do you have again?
I mean, Rista's only 4 mana. Like,
you still have to activate its abilities.
I think that's only 1 mana.
Both of its abilities.
I mean, you only really care about lifelink. I mean, people aren't killing you through a suited up Rista.
I think the main problem with this card is that like it's competing for a pretty valuable slot in those sorts of decks, because the 3-drop non-creature slot is like where you run on your Planeswalkers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dawson's been mentioned a couple times. This does work really well, Dawson. because your opponent because a bunch of equipment that you're happy sacking.
Right.
Though the mana value doesn't work out. And of course, like Seto-san is another equipment thing. You also have Toddy, a lot of archetype oriented cards with 3 mana too. So I think it's I really like this card. I think it's very interesting. And moving on to the last card, we have Cramming Student, very thematic card.
Yeah.
Puts 10 fatigues into your deck. So fatigue is a mechanic from ACA, basically the 2 mana cantrips that get put in your deck, which is bad.
They're supposed to clog up your deck, except Cramming Student has prowess, and also makes them cost 1. So you see the synergy there, right?
Yeah, so true prowess a bunch of times. Also, presumably they're playing stuff that likes you casting its sorceries, so other prowess creatures, for example, or reprise cards might also like Crying Student just to up your spell count. Crying Student's probably the top of your curve, so hopefully the fatigue isn't that big of a deal. If you do draw it, because you can play it with something else, or play with whatever you draw with. But I think maybe the more interesting stuff to do with Crying Student is play a new card from ACA, which is composed from Dreams, which very much appreciates you having a lot of fatigue. So 4 mana cards, you free cast all of the fatigue from your hand and graveyard, and then whenever you cast a spell, your opponent loses life. Then if it wasn't cast from your hand, you draw a card. Then if you don't own the spell, you get Grixis mana, but that's pretty hard to do, so not too relevant.
Yeah, you do own your own fatigues, as I found out recently.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain you do, because there are cards that you create, and I believe you do own tokens.
So the problem I see with the Compose from Dreams thing is that Cramming Student shuffles the fatigues into your deck, so you're not really guaranteed to draw them by the time you play down your Compose from Dreams.
Yeah, so I think the kind of concept of the deck is that you're not necessarily playing this as like a control deck almost, which is a bit maybe weird to say. Where you kind of Compose from Dreams is kind of your combo finish, where eventually you're gonna play it and it's gonna be very good. Or it's maybe not a control deck, but maybe a mid-range deck. And you can also play all the other fatigue generating cards from ACA. So then these are generally pretty darn good. And we have a Thoughtseize that fatigues you in Professor's Notes.
Yeah.
And these put it on top of your library, so of course you're going to be able to find them. We also have Stir the Pot, which is a unearth. So maybe you can play discard, so it helps discard your fatigues, and also can discard Crying Student, so you can turn 2 it off Stir the Pot. Maybe that's a synergy. That's worth investigating. And then you have Compose from Dreams as a big win condition that draws you a bunch of cards and does a bunch of damage shape on it.
So the main thing I'm worried about here is that what happens if you don't have the pieces in your hand and you're forced to play Cramming Student, and then you just make your deck worse for no reason? Because like if you shuffle in a bunch of fatigues, you're less likely to draw Compose from Dreams, right?
Yeah, that is of course the downside. I mean, fatigues aren't too bad if the Crying Student lives.
Oh yeah, right. And
I mean,
if they kill Cramming Student after you shuffle in your fatigues, that's also super bad because now your deck is trashed.
I mean, maybe you play some other cost reducers too. I mean, Flatboat Artisan is just generally a good value card, and though I don't think anyone's played it in value decks. I mean, it's just generally pretty good. And then of course I mean, Crying Student does make stuff like Creative Salvage a bit more interesting because Creative Salvage can't discard lands. So making a deck less land dense makes Creative Salvage better. Creative Salvage also works with a potential unearth strategy. You're looking at like Stir the Pot. Does definitely have some issues because of course fatigue is bad. You'd prefer not to play fatigue in your deck.
Yeah, I agree. Fatigue is bad. And on that note, I think we should probably end this review because we're done, right?
Yep, and that's the last card we want to talk about. We have covered a lot of cards. Not quite sure how many.
34, because that's what Cockroach says.
Right, so that's 2/3 of the set. Last third is definitely interesting. You should just look at this whole set. Indu minus is reprint on Instigator to get you all the new cards. Though I think basically all of them have a constructing niche and are like worth looking at.
Really?
But
even Epitome of whatever that thing's called.
Yeah, Epitome of Force.
Yeah.
Where a lot of them were just taking Epitome of Force example, because that's my own card. I can make an example of it. It's just generally pretty straightforward. So you can definitely play it. I think it plays, but I think a lot of them are play pretty naturally, and go in decks that you expect them to go in. So the cards we picked out were just the ones that we thought had
stuff to talk about.
Yeah, more interesting stuff to talk about. And how long have we been recording? Good amount of time. So
yeah,
clearly had some stuff to talk about with these.